Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. I'm delighted tonight to be with Sheikha Fatima Barkatulla. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Brother Sabur. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. It's good to be speaking to you. We used to work together a few years ago on materials, if you remember, quite about 10
Yes,
years ago.
subhanAllah. It's been, I don't know, I still remember you as a young instructor,
Yes.
mashallah. We used to be, I think there was just such an amazing energy in those days, right?
Oh, yeah.
Everyone like thinking of ideas, and the sky was the limit in terms of ideas, right?
Yep. Yep.
In Dawah,
Absolutely.
mashallah.
Alhamdulillah, those were very interesting days, seeds of change days, which we're going to be getting into in a little while. So, just to introduce us, our viewers, to who you are, just going to read your LinkedIn profile. Fatima Barakatullah is an award-winning British scholar of Islamic law, founder and CEO of Muslim Womanhood, and author and presenter of the Ilm Feed podcast, and Aziz Foundation scholar who has a master's degree in Islamic law from SOAS Law School, University of London. She has a rich Islamic education from an early age thanks to her parents. She studied Arabic and Islamic studies in Egypt at prominent institutions such as Al-Fajr Center, Cordoba Institute, and a college of Al-Azhar University. She graduated from As-Salam Institute's advanced license in Islamic scholarship and from the Alamiya program at Ibrahim College Seminary with a specialization in fiqh. She is currently working on two books, Women in the Quran and Aisha, Scholar of Islam, having authored her groundbreaking first book, Khadija, Mother of History's Greatest Nation. She has been a key contributor to the discourse surrounding Muslim women in the West, contributing to Westminster faith debates, documentaries, and live shows for BBC Radio 4, the World Service, as well as BBC Television, Channel 4, and Islam Channel. She was the director of Seeds of Change, the biggest Muslim women's conference in Europe, and a Dawah trainer for IERA. In 2014, she was.
That's old.
Is that old? This is your LinkedIn.
I mean, because it says, you just said, and is now a trainer for IERA.
Oh, no, I meant to say, and a trainer for IERA. In 2014, she was awarded Icon, I don't know how to pronounce that, International Award for Young Women in Dawah and Community Service at a ceremony in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In 2022, she was awarded the Doreen Hinchcliffe Memorial Prize by SOAS Law Department for being the best overall master's student in Islamic law. This is even the best part. Funnily enough, I remember coming across your article in, I think, Telegraph. Did you write for the Telegraph? Or
The Times.
The Times, yes. That was actually one of my first things because obviously IERA was a small knit team then. And so we knew what each one of us was doing. And when I joined, I think in 2010, you wrote that for the Times.
Yeah, I wrote a few articles for the Times. Credo was like their series that the chief rabbi used to write, and Christian priests and things like that. They never really had Muslims
on
there.
Jonathan Sachs? Is that?
Yeah, it was Jonathan Sachs at the time. He writes amazing articles, but by the way,
yeah.
So
he did. He's gone now.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
So they asked me on certain topics to just elaborate on aspects of Islam, So it was like da'wah handed on a plate,
Alhamdulillah.
Mashallah.
Excellent. So that's the introduction to Sister Fatima. I actually invited her to come on this live stream to speak about a topic which I find fascinating, which is the role of women in the da'wah. Now, I wanted to not give an argument for it, but I just wanted to say something off the bat in case you have those people who say women shouldn't be involved in da'wah.
Okay.
This is something which Saqib Sattar, former CEO and one of the founders of IERA, said that, look, when people say generally, the masses shouldn't give dawah, or this person shouldn't give dawah because you need to be a scholar, or in some cases somebody will say something else or whatever. The fact is, all across the UK, all across the Western world, dawah conversations are happening anyway. They're happening in takeaways, they're happening in Uber taxis, they're happening. Someone is saying, why does Islam do this? And Muslims are engaged in those conversations, whether we like it or not, and they're doing it badly. And that includes men, women, children, everybody. So why not have a system, have a way, have a tariqah, have a methodology by which people can actually do it more effectively? Because you can't live in a cocoon, especially if you're a Muslim woman, because you're more likely to be asked questions than you are than men are to be questioned, or other people. And in fact, you're more likely to be targeted as well. So I mean, that's the way I like to think of it, that, you know, at a very base level, before we get into arguments and you know, where women fit in and what roles they play and the impact they can have, and the positive stories we already have, at a very base level, anybody who has any doubts about the involvement of women in dawah, they should consider the fact that it's inescapable. So we have to speak about this topic. What would you say to that?
I've never come across anyone saying that women shouldn't be involved in dawah. I don't know what you mean by that.
It's a pretty popular thing, I would say.
Do they mean public, like public speaking and maybe being on camera? I can understand people having issues with that, but in terms of everyday inviting, if we just move away from the word da'wah, okay, and just say, okay, sharing the message of Islam with other people, you know, that's the duty of every single Muslim. In fact, we don't really need, I don't want to say anything negative about this stream, but we don't really need to separate women in da'wah from men in da'wah, because Muslims are supposed to, you know, share the message of Islam with others, because we want to save as many people as possible, bring as many people as possible to Allah, so that they can have good lives as well as lives hereafter. And that's not a male or female thing, right? We have Khadija radiallahu anha, who literally bankrolled the da'wah, if you want to call it that, right? Her money, like, we Muslims sitting all over the world today would not be here without the support and the funding that our mother Khadija radiallahu anha gave to the message of Islam, right? The women at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam were just as involved as the men. You know, who brought Umar bin al-Khattab to Islam? Like, you could say there were lots of different things that happened, but what about his sister? You know, the incident with his sister, where she eventually, you know, she got hit by him, basically, for the sake of da'wah, right? For the sake of Islam. And then she showed him the Quranic verses that they were reading, and that softened his heart, right? Seeing his sister so committed and willing to be beaten for the sake of Allah softened his heart. And so many women in Islamic history, especially wealthy women, would fund dawah efforts, educational efforts. So I don't really see this as a male and female thing. I think, actually, if I just go back to my own childhood, I was doing dawah when I was a kid, you know, like, not because I thought I want to be a da'i. It wasn't like that. It was, I'm at school, I'm the only Muslim, visible Muslim, I wear the hijab, my parents are religious, people keep asking me questions about Islam. Simple as that, you know? And so I better be able to explain myself, and I want to share this, and I see my religion being demonized. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose for us women to be such visible representations of this deen in a way that the men aren't, right? I mean, like, now even beards are in fashion, so you can't even look at a Muslim man and think he's a Muslim. Like, you can't see a man with a beard and think he's definitely a Muslim, right? Everyone has a beard now. So the hijab and us as Muslim women, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who put us in this position that not only are we demonized the most, you know, our dress, Our hijab is banned in some countries, or we're targeted for it. But also, we are walking, talking representatives of the deen, whether we like it or not. So I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who put us in this position that we're engaging in da'wah even without speaking.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the fact is, even if a Muslim woman did not want to give dawah in the West, she's going to be put into positions where she's going to have to answer questions. And so she is going to be involved in those dawah conversations, but without training, without support, without motivation, without understanding of what she needs to convey, she'll actually just do it badly. I actually know of a few cases where, people who became, du'at and were ayah volunteers and converted to Islam, they actually, their story into Islam was in terms of a sister who was at school or a work colleague or somebody who interacted with them. So and those things happen naturally, like I can think of one of our revert brothers who, he was at school and he had all these ideas about Muslim women being oppressed, and he started talking to one of the other teachers in East London, and she gave him a copy of the Quran, and then he ended up converting to Islam. So these things happen. They happen organically.
Yeah, of course, we have to have adab, right? We have to have our Islamic etiquette, and that's for men as well as women, right? When it comes to da'wah. But as Muslims living in the West, especially, or Muslims who are minorities, it's our duty. And I think that's not controversial. Scholars of Islam also say that it's our duty to convey the message to the best of our ability. It doesn't mean we need to now go out and seek out men, for example, to do da'wah too, just as the brothers wouldn't necessarily be encouraged to target women, but as long as the Islamic boundaries are kept to, we share the message of Islam with people. And there's something I want to tell you, Brother Sabur, because one of the great things, of course, that IERA and the Dawah movements did was help us to, like you said, have a framework that would help us to convey the message in a more structured way, right? And prioritize the message, right? So instead of spending days and days arguing with somebody, trying to convince them that the hijab is a good thing, we would go straight to talking about God, right? We'd make sure that they actually believe in God in the first place, right? And we would go through the Gorap, for example, God's existence, oneness, revelation, and prophethood. And it gave us that wonderful structure, which was very useful. But during my master's research, I actually interviewed a lot of female converts to Islam. And the majority of them were white converts, British, who had come to Islam either after 9/11 or around that time, just before. And it was really interesting to me, the things that it attracted them to Islam. And believe me, Brother Sabur, it's not necessarily dawah conversations. Like sometimes we as da'is, we overemphasize dawah conversations. I don't want to belittle dawah conversations, okay? At the same time, I think sometimes apologetics has become synonymous with dawah. And let me tell you the sorts of things that these women were telling me brought them to Islam. Some of them were teachers who had little children in their classes who were Muslims, who used to keep sharing aspects of Islam with them, just naturally, telling them about Ramadan, inviting them to their house for an iftar, simple things like that. Others were people who saw sisters in hijab in their classes as they were growing up, and they said they secretly admired those sisters. So they secretly admired aspects of Islam. Others said, again, I already mentioned, they were invited into Muslim homes and they experienced warm family atmospheres for the first time, So I think we can also overemphasize dawah conversations, and we can overemphasize the kind of apologetic side of things, when actually People coming to Islam is not just a rational thing. It's not just about their minds being convinced of something. Their hearts have to be moved as well. Their emotions have to be engaged as well. And I think that's actually where women are very, very effective, and women can be very effective. Like, I see my mom, she's never attended a Dawah course. Actually, she was part of Tablighi Jamaat as a kid, but I don't know if that counts, because they're mainly doing Dawah to Muslims, right? In India. But my mom, she does Dawah all the time. Like, she cooks for people and her neighbors, and like all her neighbors know her, and she'll invite people's kids around. And the mean neighbors that we used to have as kids, racist neighbors, my parents always happened to just seem to win them round, after years and years of just treating them well. And it was things like that then I saw, people's hearts changing. And I think we've got to emphasize those, the good character, being a shining example of what it is to be a Muslim. We've got to keep emphasizing that as well, because most people who you and I know who came to Islam, even people like Abdurrahim, and what did they say? They say, oh, they had an interaction with a Muslim. They saw a Muslim praying. A Muslim treated them in this way or that way, It's usually those types of things that at least strike their hearts.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm going on. Please interrupt me.
No, that's all right. No, you've made some very interesting points, because it's a segue into, conversations. And what's interesting is, with the Gorap, when you are in those, environments where, you invite somebody over and they feel the warmth of Islam, but then they have a question like, why do you fast? We can always go back to the structure. I think it's all about confidence, because look, at the end of the day, you're not going to convert to a religion where somebody's talking to you and they don't sound convinced. And with something like the Gorap, even if you don't use it, you have it as a structure, you have it as something that, if they're going to ask a difficult question, you have a way of taking it back to the foundations of Islam. But I think something that I think is interesting is, when it comes to, women in particular receiving the message of Islam, this is where women are important, because I've said this before, and I'm happy to say it again live, that, I do not find it easy talking to the opposite gender, because I genuinely believe that if I'm in the street and I'm handing out a flyer to a woman, I think she'll get intimidated. So, I've experienced this. That literally, when they can actually get a bit scared. So, it's so important that, when we do have those interactions, that, we keep in mind that, the psychology is important. Because there's all these, especially women, when they see another woman who's practicing Islam, or maybe a convert, or they always have these questions, are you doing this because you're forced to do it? Do you really believe this?
Right. Yeah.
And that's always a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
But also sometimes, like, I'll give you an example of a conversation I had with a very interesting feminist in East London. So she had been researching Islam for something like 13 years. She studied Islam at university as part of a degree. She worked as a social worker in East London, so she interacted with a lot of women. She actually knew a lot. She was watching videos of like Mufti Menk and Numan Ali Khan, and like, she's really knowledgeable. In fact, she was, I would say, more knowledgeable than the average Muslim when it came to all these different things. And she used to come to the stall, hang around, and then leave, come to the stall, hang around, leave. So once I thought, what, this is too much. Like, I have to just tell her to accept Islam. Like, you're coming here, and you're doing all these things. 13 years is a long time. So I said to her, look, why don't you just accept Islam? And she was really just went quiet. Although before that, she was quite talkative and stuff. So I was really trying to push her, like, what's the issue? So I just said to her, look, directly, do you believe in God? Do you believe in Allah? Like, yeah.
Sorry.
And she's very comfortable, talking about Islam and Allah. Said, do you believe the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is Allah's messenger? She said, yeah. So I was like, okay, why don't you become Muslim? And she goes, well, problem is I'm a feminist, and there's certain things in the Sharia, in the Quran, in Islam, which I just can't accept. As a feminist, I just cannot accept those things. So I mean, this isn't she's the type of woman who would know all of the, the Hanafis say this and the Shah, like she knew her stuff. So I just said to her, look, so what? I don't understand these things. I can't justify, like she brings out, woman gets half the inheritance of a man or whatever. The fact is, I believe it's true because Allah said so. So I said to her, look, do you accept that if God is all knowing, that it doesn't really matter whether you understand these things or you're comfortable with them, that they're just true? And she said, yeah. And then alhamdulillah, she took Shahada, like after 13 years of research, right? And
Right.
all it really took is, that material you worked on a few years ago, Secrets of the Muslim Woman. You start off with all the doubts and you bring it back to what? You bring it back to Tawheed. When you bring it back to Tawheed, you bring it back to, look, ultimately this is from Allah. Then it makes sense. Otherwise, it would never make sense. And maybe you can speak a little bit about Secrets of a Muslim Woman, because we didn't mention that as a material. That was really fantastic. And that's
actually we should also explain to people what Gorap is, because we're assuming that everyone understands what we're talking about. But do you mind if I just introduce it to people who?
Yeah, Bismillah.
I've noticed that there's a new generation of people who don't actually know it, so I think we need to. So basically, I remember Sheikh Abdurrahim telling us that, he used to go to do dawah in the park, and once Sheikh Muhammad Ismail came and to watch him, and he saw that, they were having discussions about all the different aspects of Islam, defending different aspects of Islam that people kept questioning. And I think it was Sheikh Muhammad Ismail who said from Egypt, he said to Sheikh Abdurrahim Green that instead of spending all this time trying to convince them of different aspects of Islam, the laws, the secondary things, basically, if you spent all your time focusing on establishing the existence of God, the oneness of God, right? Revelation, in other words, the Quran being from God, and prophethood, the prophethood of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if you were to establish that in people's hearts and get them to accept those things, then everything else will follow.
Yep.
See? So if they can accept those things, then just like you had that conversation with that sister and you said, well, if it's from God, does it matter what the details are? That's all that really matters, that it's from God, right? You accept what's from God. And so IERA, being founded by Sheikh Abdurrahim, took this framework and encapsulated it in this phrase, Gorap, which stands for God's existence, oneness, revelation, and prophethood. Yeah. And it's basically the structure for a dawah conversation. So anytime you're having a dawah, like say somebody at work or somebody starts talking to you about, how come Muslims can have more than one wife or something like this, yeah, you can talk about that a little bit, but as a da'i, what you're doing is you're not going to just dwell on that. You're going to always take it back to, well, do you believe there's a higher power? You're going to take them back to Gorap. You're going to start talking to them about God, God's existence, oneness, and in that order. So if they already believe in God, you might not have to worry about that. So you can move on to the next thing, which is the oneness of God, or revelation, the truth of the Quran, right? And then the prophethood of the prophet. So yeah, so that's basically what Gorap was, a way to have a more effective da'wah conversation with someone.
Yeah. And in a way, Gorap isn't classical apologetics, because classical apologetics is, well, why can a man have more than one wife? There are more women than men, and men die in war, and all these reasons and justifications, which is fine, but it doesn't bring people to Islam. And the powerful thing is, you will stop all this endless discussion and just go back to the foundation. And I think, look, human beings are simple. They're very, very simple. And we all submit to something. And the power of the Gorap is essentially to say, well, is there a chance that there's someone more knowledgeable than you, that God knows more than you and you know very little? Yes, of course, obviously there is. If you believe God exists and God is all knowing, well, then you just submit when it comes to these things. And I think that makes the work of the du'at much easier, because they know they need to stick to something very, very simple.
Yeah.
So
and of course they can tailor it, can't they? They can
yeah.
tailor it, because I think another element of da'wah is people have different personalities and different things appeal to different people, right? Some people are attracted to Islam through its art. I mean, as a way to enter, as a way to enter become interested, for example, right?
Yeah.
Some people are attracted to Islam through science. It's just a fact that there's so many people you meet, they say, oh, I was just blown away at how accurate aspects of the Quran are with, and congruous they are with modern day knowledge. So I think, and some people, they're more attracted to the heart elements, the things that, the heart softeners. So I actually think a da'i is like a doctor. When you're, like, when I'm trying to have a dawah conversation with my professor, there's a different prescription, that I'm going to exercise there, right, than I am to my neighbor maybe, or to a lady who's searching for God, who I've just happened to meet, or somebody who's just gone through a trauma, So I think as da'is, we have to be like that. It's not one size fits all. But that structure, what that structure does is it reminds you of the priorities, so that you can actually progress in that dawah relationship, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially when it comes to the topic of women in Islam, the Gorap is quite important, because there are certain things nowadays which are extremely difficult to try and justify. Of course, we believe that there's reasons behind, there's wisdom behind each Islamic teaching, but in a world where feminist ideology and other types of ideologies, liberal ideologies, are so universally taught, it's so difficult to try and explain to somebody why men get double the share of the women. Like, you could spend all day on it. You could go over sociological studies and responsibilities and gender roles. And sometimes you just have to just go back to basics, and you just have to say, look, this is it. This is the actual case. Now, in your experience, you spoke about the reverts that, you interacted with, and, they came to Islam through that, some were teachers, or some, interacted with Muslims, whatever it is. But that's obviously the characterization of these reverts and how they're coming in. What do you think is the case with the characteristics needed for a woman to be involved in dawah? Because we don't really see that many women involved in dawah. And when they are involved, then sometimes they do feel a type of, like, even in the comment section, somebody wrote, like, where do they fit in? They have this feeling like, where do I even fit in this? Because, men are doing this, or it seems like a very male dominated sort of genre.
I don't agree that women are not involved in dawah.
Okay.
I think that, unfortunately, in our times, we've started to make dawah synonymous with being on camera, like having dawah interactions on camera.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there are more brothers doing that, Like, I've been to Hyde Park, I went to Speaker's Corner, and I actually thought to myself, one day, maybe when I'm an old lady, I might do this, when my husband doesn't mind anymore, okay, or something. But I looked at it and I thought, no, this is a very male environment. It is. It's quite an aggressive environment. You could literally get pushed around in that place, as everyone can see, right? And then that becomes, and of course, all the brothers, sorry to say, but they're all doing it for YouTube as well. You know what I mean? They all film everything as well, which has its benefits, but I think it also has many detriments. We could go into that later. And so Dawah has become a bit of a spectacle as well now, right?
Mhm.
Everyone loves seeing a bit of a smackdown of somebody. Astaghfirullah. It's really bad. It's actually very bad, because that's like the opposite of Dawah in a way, right? Seeing somebody humiliated, okay, might be quite satisfying, especially if they're attacking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or they're attacking our something that our deen, which we hold so dear, right?
Yeah.
And I understand that there are certain characters who really need to be dealt with, right? People like, some of these ex-Muslims, people who almost are like rabid, I don't want to say it, but they just become like enemies of Islam, and they're doing whatever they can to attack Islam. I understand there need to be some people who are maybe a little bit tough on them, but I fear that we've started to make Dawah synonymous with having a YouTube channel, okay, and then calling yourself a da'i, right? And then doing smackdowns, okay, and being quite aggressive and all of that, when actually I'm actually quite surprised at how casually sisters do Dawah all the time. So Brother Sabur, I'm telling you, I would actually question that. I meet sisters, because remember, sisters are working now, right? Sisters are in every field of work.
Yeah.
I see sisters who do you think are the ones who are giving Eid presents? Like, when was the last time you gave an Eid present as a man? I don't want to be rude, but I do have plenty of sons and men in my life, and I know that it's the women who think of giving the gifts, right?
That's true.
Even to the men's relatives, even to our own husband's relatives.
That's true.
So don't you think sisters at work are the ones who are giving the gifts? Sisters at work are the ones who are organizing iftars. A lot of the time, they're organizing these things. Even at university, I see sisters who, like I said, because I've interviewed so many converts, female converts, yes, the beginning was things like a sister inviting them to their house and being kind to them and stuff. But then it was very interesting, because those very same sisters would eventually have a Dawah conversation with them. They would give them a copy of the Quran, or they would, and sometimes it was through brothers, that these women came to Islam. But the point is that those sisters, they might be unknown, their names are not known, they're not trying to do it for the camera, they don't have YouTube channels, you're never going to hear about them. But they are doing Dawah on a day-to-day basis in a very natural, and I would say more sincere way. So I don't think we want to discount that.
Yeah, that's interesting you said that, because I'm having a conversation with one of our senior du'ats, and we were talking about the fact that there's a lot of people out there giving Dawah who do not interact at all with the online world, right? You do not see them on, and we talk about brothers here, but I'm sure that the same is true with the sisters. And when you are actually giving Dawah in that sort of setting, it does have a bigger impact. I remember one of these famous atheists who the brothers have debated. I went and I met a brother who he basically, there was a debate about to be set up, and then that year said to me that actually, no, I want to talk to this guy one-to-one, because I know when the camera's on, this atheist is not going to be sincere. So
Exactly.
we need that. We actually, because look, it's human nature, isn't it? Like,
why? Because humans don't like to lose face. They want to save face. Yeah, it's like I feel like some of the soft skills, negotiation skills. If you read any book on influence, right, and persuasion, usually these are business books for sales, right?
yeah.
And okay, another way of looking at dawah is type of sale. You know, we are salesmen and women. You know, I prefer the spiritual doctor one. You know, I think it's because we're Asians, we like doctors more, right? Than salesmen. But we are salesmen of sorts, right? And so when you're trying to sell something, or when you're trying to, I mean, just think about the word invite. You're inviting somebody. That's the spirit with which we're supposed to be doing it. And what's happened is sadly, I feel like there's too much humiliating going on, you know? We don't allow people to save face. We don't use the skills that we were taught. You know, that whole thing, I don't know, it's like a business thing where when you're going to criticize somebody, you do a criticism sandwich, right? You start off saying something positive, you find common ground, you know, and then maybe you word the criticism in quite a diplomatic way, and then you end with something positive, right? Like all of that kind of painstaking effort in communication is there so that you end up influencing the person and getting what you want without humiliating them, you know? But don't you feel that nowadays, especially some of the brothers, they've lost that deep care, you know? It's almost like you're trying to win something. I'm trying to win this shahada. And in order to win this shahada, instead of listening very carefully, instead of having a lot of empathy, instead of, you know, all of those soft skills, I'm just here to convey something. I want to make you accept something. I want to make your argument look silly. I'm just afraid, actually, that there's too much of that going on, and we need to rein it in.
So I think a good way of explaining this is the conflation of dawah and debates, because debates are very different to dawah. Debates are not actually dawah. When you are having a debate,
That's true, yeah.
you're there to literally rip apart the opponent, and the opponent's there to rip you apart. But that is not actually dawah. It's actually a debate. And now dawah has become synonymous with debates. So we have to understand, for example, Speaker's Corner, you know, the first time I went there, I remember it was like a madhouse. And these people, these certain people that come there, they are battle-hardened Islamophobes, right? They are people who they have no, like, it's not like they're coming there with sincerity. Now, those people are very different to, I think it was Sister Nyla Edwards who's in the comments said something like she prefers Dawah stalls to like Speaker's Corner. You're gonna look, Speaker's Corner is a place of debate, and I'm not, I can't, you know, when you're describing you know, people who rip other people apart, and like I'm sure like I'm guilty of that as well. Thing is, look, that's what you do when you debate. You're supposed to just do that. But the problem is that is not dawah. Dawah is actually what happens at dawah tables. Dawah is actually what happens in, you know, these remote parts of the world, or at workplaces, and or you know, iftars and this type of thing. You do get some good dawah conversation in Speaker's Corner. I'm not denying that. There is a lot of debate. Even if we go back to the golden days of Speaker's Corner in 1990s, oh my God, dawah in the park. I don't know if you remember those videos. Some of them were like really heated debates with the Nation of Islam, and then
Yeah.
and then, you know, all these other atheists and all this type of thing. I think what's
Yeah.
important is, look, everybody, look, what works online, what fits the algorithm is not only stuff in Speaker's Corner, but actually controversies in Speaker's Corner. Some guy gets arrested, or those videos go viral, right? People are like, this happened, that happened.
Yeah, but Brother Sabur, some of that stuff is just frankly embarrassing. You know, it's just embarrassing that our brothers are involved with that stuff. Like, what happened to Muslims wanting to keep their reputations clean? You know, there's something that I heard Professor Jordan Peterson say that I think is really true. And I know that, you know, it might, in some, this isn't a defense of him or anything like that, but there's just a point that he made that I think is very true. He said that if you want people to come to your religion, be a shining example of your religion, you know.
Yep.
And we didn't need Jordan Peterson to tell us that. We know that, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ was literally that. The reason why people came to him and accepted him was not because of smackdowns, you know. It was because of his excellent characters, because of his it's because of his track record, his reputation. He was a peacemaker. He was the most honest person amongst them, right? It was that reputation and that excellent character and those types of things that attracted people to him. Now, I'm not saying that Dawah in the Park and those things have no utility or benefit. But what I'm afraid of is that we've started to make them seem as though, you know, those are like the epitome of Dawah. Those are like the highest forms of Dawah, when actually I think everyday interactions that Muslims are having that nobody gets to see, nobody notices.
Yeah.
Those are the ones. And by the way, there's scholars, so many scholars that I know. When I say scholars, I mean people who've, you know, done Alamiyah degrees, or they're not known as da'is, famous, but they are constantly involved in Dawah work, but they don't do it for the camera. Can I say one more thing about the park? There's actually one benefit of the park and debate style stuff, right? Yeah. And I think the benefit of it is probably more for the Muslims than for the non-Muslims.
Yeah, I think so.
Right? Because I remember as a teenager.
Yeah.
So this is in the 90s. I was reading these terrible books. I don't know why. I was reading these books written by Americans about Muslim countries, and they had all sorts of attacks on Islam in them. And I just come from a school environment where I was like the only practicing Muslim. I was constantly asked questions, and I would go to my dad. He'd give me answers, and I would give those answers. But there were always still certain questions I had in my head. And believe it or not, I was in Cairo. I was 17 years old. One of my friends brought a cassette, Dawah in the Park. Okay, Abdurrahim Green. It was like a VCR. I remember the VCR days, right? This is before YouTube. And she said, "Oh, you got to watch this." And I was like, "Okay." And there was somebody had a TV and we had a VCR, so she put it in, and we watched it from beginning to end. And what Abdurrahim Green did in those videos was he laid out in a very structured and a very logical way a case for Islam. You know, basically what's that CD we used to have? Another View. It's a bit like Another View, but in Speaker's Corner. And I remember watching those videos actually helped strengthen our iman. Definitely, you know. So whether they help people to actually come to Islam or not, I don't know. I'm sure there are instances where they might. But in terms of like us living in an environment where Islam is constantly attacked and probably needing a little bit of a smackdown or two, you know, needing to witness that once in a while just to kind of satisfy some kind of psychological need we have, but also to fix our own thinking, you know, and confidence. I can see the benefit from that perspective.
I think look, the way I would explain it, if somebody was to pose this to me, is I would say Speaker's Corner is not the height of Dawah. Speaker's Corner is definitely a place of the natural selection of ideas. Like there are people, like I've traveled, alhamdulillah, extensively. There are people in Africa and Latin America and Asia and other places who've been watching Speaker's Corner, and it helped them get rid of their doubts. It helped them.
Right. Yes. Yes. Exactly. That's what I mean.
Look, let's put it this way. You know, Sheikh Ahmed Dida, what did he do? If I go to my neighbor, my Christian neighbor, and I try to explain to them the Dida way of giving dawah, right? He doesn't know the Bible, doesn't know these things. It's not going to have an impact on him. In fact, if I tell him about the fact that Jesus is a prophet in Islam, and we believe in him, and very basic things. Those are going to work better than the using what's that combat kit book that he had and stuff. However, Sheikh Didat is probably one of the most influential Muslims of the last 100 years, right?
Of course.
He literally created, and he motivated people not only to do the type of dawah he was doing, but base level dawah. So many Muslims were being affected by these doubts and all these issues that were coming up. So he was smashing them. The fact is, look, he had a role to play, but he's a debater. He wasn't there to speak to your, he wasn't there to deal with the nice guys. He was there to deal with the bad guys. So when it comes to the speaker's corner type of debating, that's separate to dawah. Dawah is the basic grassroots.
At the same time, Sheikh Ahmed Didat had excellent character. He didn't get into fights.
Well, I don't know about that.
The police were never called.
I mean, he was quite fiery, and in fact, I mean, a lot of his stuff is probably inspired the likes of whatever happens at Speaker's Corner or other parts of the world. So
yes, except with a thug element to it, I would say. Yeah. Because look, at the end of the day, Sheikh Ahmed Didat came at a time, it was the post-colonial smackdown that was needed. Remember, we were all Asians mainly in the West, right? The Muslim population was mainly Asians who had just come out of this colonial era, who were feeling pretty low, in terms of psychologically. The white man had power over everyone and kept telling Muslims how inferior they were, right? So in that kind of environment, I can see Sheikh Ahmed Didat was absolutely necessary. But I must say, him, and then I would say what came after him, people like Sheikh Zakir Naik, etc., they kept a certain decorum. I'm just saying, Yani, people should learn from that. They still had a certain decorum. They still dressed a certain way, behaved a certain way. Okay. And so I just hope that our generation, now that we're more confident, because that's one thing we've got, right? We've grown up in the West, so we have a type of confidence, and we're not as impressed, by the Western culture, right? As previous generations, the generation that just came out of colonialism and after them were. We've got a certain confidence. English is our first language. With that, I think we should also exercise some restraint and decorum, and just be careful about that. Be very careful. I'd like to ask you, like, when you said there aren't that many sisters in Dawah, what did you mean by that? Do you think you meant public Dawah?
Okay, so I would say public dawah definitely, but also dawah from the perspective of organizations, dawah from the perspective of grassroots as well. Because look, if we go to take a random country I visited not too long ago, Nigeria, I was really happy to see that actually they had their own female-led dawah organization, which was dealing with women. It's kind of like Women in Dawah. I don't know what it was called. You don't really see that in other parts of the world, right? You normally see, and with men, we're living in a time now where, in the past, you give dawah to a tribal chief, the whole, village becomes Muslim and that kind of thing. We're living in a very individualistic society, and you need, particular strategies for different demographics. And with, that group, Women in Dawah in Latin America, they also have a certain, actually, there's a lot more female du'at there. They will be more involved, but you will not find that so much. I mean, you find it is disproportionately male, and it's important to highlight, obviously, the fact that being behind camera doesn't mean that you're more important, or there's more men behind cameras, so therefore women are involved. I take that point actually, and that was, I think that's a very important point. But I think even at a grassroots level, men do think about dawah, and I think women maybe they don't see themselves as being part of a structured way of being involved in dawah. Maybe at one-to-one level they are.
I don't know. I think sisters just don't show off that much. Seriously. I'm actually not trying to be funny here. I'm because I see the sisters, I hear from them. They're not that famous, and they're maybe not within the view of the brothers, you know.
Yes.
But for example, in Ireland, we've got Muslim Sisters of Air. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Right.
They, subhanallah, they run soup kitchens, massive soup kitchens. But for them, it's all about dawah. So they'd run these soup kitchens and have people lining up all the time. And then they have other things that they do as follow up, you know, that could contribute to dawah, you know. There are sisters in the UK, in London. I attended, you know, convert support circles, and there's a number of centers. When you go there, you see the sisters. They're not famous. You wouldn't even know their name, probably, right? But they're running these centers where non-Muslims even come and attend, and they come to just observe. And these sisters are doing amazing work. All I'm saying is, I would like to encourage the brothers not to think that just because you don't know about the efforts, okay, that they don't exist. I think sisters, by our nature, we tend to, I would say, you know, I'm a bit more extrovert actually than maybe a lot of other sisters, but a lot of sisters, they're just doing their work in local areas, not necessarily on an international stage, but they're doing the grassroots work that actually is needed, you know, the supporting of new Muslims, the teaching them how to pray, the classes, you know, inviting non-Muslims to just come and observe and just be part of this community, etc. I've seen so many projects that I just don't think is true, really. I think actually IERA doesn't realize the positive impact it had. That maybe was a bit of a silent impact, you know, on sisters. But there's another element, Brother Sabur, and that is that, and this is controversial, you know, as well, that a lot of the Dawah organizations are not very welcoming and accommodating to sisters.
I would say
and they don't really have space for sisters. Like, I didn't really want to set up a Muslim women's organization, to be honest with you. I didn't really want to do it. I would rather have been a department in an already set up organization, you know? But I felt that it wasn't really possible, you know? Because I feel like a lot of the organizations, I don't want to call them the brothers organizations, but they kind of are. They kind of set up by brothers, which is fine. And they do include sisters at an operational level, yeah, most of the time, or on a volunteers level, okay? But what I found is, in terms of knowing how to integrate sisters in terms of like people who are more on the thinking level, or even in the mass movement level, I feel like brothers sometimes struggle with knowing how to do it, you know, in an Islamic way. I mean, I do empathize, you know, because it is hard. Like, if you're trying to maintain, I don't know, adab and things like that, and, you know, you don't want to have a free mixed environment.
Could it not be? I mean, I definitely think IRA is an exception to that, because when I joined in 2010, there was a lot of involvement of sisters, and there still is, especially in Latin America. However, I do understand what you're saying, because I have seen this, and it's not just Islamic, it's not just Dawah organizations, it's also Islamic organizations. Now, I may put it down to a lack of assertiveness as well. I mean, even amongst say you have any Islamic organization and you look at the people who have the loudest voices, it's not normally the introverts anyway. So it's not even to do with males. It's to do with your actual way of asserting yourself. And maybe it's because of a lack of assertiveness rather than an environment, right? Because I can think of, I'm not going to name, but I can think of one person who's a sister, but is very extroverted and has actually come on to that strategic level. So that's also, something to keep in mind. It
Yeah,
could be to do with personality
maybe.
traits rather than, I mean, this is something funny I was discussing with actually, I'm not going to mention that because that point I think will be
Or I would say sometimes sisters don't know how to, like
yeah.
the opportunities are not made to find sisters who could be integrated, or there's an assumption made that, I don't know, I think it is changing slowly, but just anecdotally I'll tell you that sisters, when sisters get together and they talk about this, they do talk about this, by the way, they say, I was such a talented person, I've got X and XYZ qualifications, I've had XYZ experience, but now I'm working for a non-Muslim organization. They will put me in a high position, they'll put me in a strategic position, they'll put me where I deserve to be, basically, right, based on my skills and my knowledge. But the Muslim organizations just wouldn't do it. And they do sometimes feel that some of the Muslim organizations are quite, like, I don't want to say they're like a boys' club, but they prefer to employ people who are known quantities, right? Who are known to them. Known quantities. Yani, people they know, who know people who they know, and it tends to end up being brothers, because brothers know brothers more, right? And then that's one element. The other element I think we shouldn't discount as well is that probably all over the world, every single da'i, every single alim scholar that you see, every single head of a Muslim organization that you see that is a man, has got women behind him, supporting him, right? And that's also an important role. If you think about Khadija radiallahu anha, she wasn't the one standing on the mountain calling the people, right? But when you think about the Prophet ﷺ arranging banquets for the Quraysh, for members of his family, or you think about all the different things that he did, she was probably the one behind that. She would have been the one who was, like I said, in the background, if you like, but the backbone of the dawah in that sense. So again, I think it comes back to visibility, maybe in those countries that you're talking about, those brothers, they get a really good meal at the end of the day, because their wives are committed wives. And it's true. I'm not joking. I'm not joking, but I am a little bit. But it's actually true, that the more public work you do, the less you have time for your home and your family, right? So I'm sure that a lot of sisters are doing that kind of work, where they are.
And that is work. That is actually work.
Yes.
That is work. I mean, I'm thinking back to my mum, may Allah give her Jannah, that she was really supportive of me being involved in dawah. And even, sometimes like you need that motherly figure telling you, you're doing the right thing and, supporting you, and that, and if a male member of my family gave me that support, it wouldn't have had the same impact.
Of course.
So definitely that's there. I mean, in fact, I'm going to tell you something interesting, Sister Fatima. When I first started practicing, I went through the because my family went through the earliest, some of my members of my family in Pakistan, they went through Farhat Hashmi's Al Huda international thing, right? So they were some of the first people to study under her. So my mom also studied, and then my other people in my family, sister and stuff. And I remember I started going through, Dr. Farhat's tafsir. And I remember there was one point in which she said, Muslims are basically not doing their job. Here we have one of the Sahaba who learned like Hebrew in like 17 days. Here we have people learning a different language to go and convert people to their religion. Why aren't Muslims doing this? And that was one of my earliest motivations to get involved in Dawah. This is back in like 2009, right? So I remember when I met Dr. Farad's son, Hisham, I actually wanted him to convey that to Dr. Farad, that look, her impact on me facilitated me getting involved in Dawah. So I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a hidden hand, there's a hidden role that's so important. And it's actually not weighed as Dawah. It's just seen as, it's intangible.
Yeah.
But it's super, super important.
Yeah, and even some of our brothers in Ayura, I remember some of them going to their houses with their mums' houses, right? And their mums are like really involved in having these dinners, inviting everyone around.
Yeah.
I don't think our generation of women do that stuff,
Well,
so I don't know. Sometimes we should be careful, because if we encourage sisters to be too much involved in, like, I guess what I'm sharing with you here is my own kind of conflict, right? The more we encourage sisters, or that we become part of like public organizations that require us to do more formal kind of work, we have to be careful, because we don't want the home to suffer. We don't want families to suffer, right? And a lot of those sisters who do a lot of public work, when you talk to them privately, as I do, there's lots of struggles going on, sometimes with their marriages, sometimes, some of the Da'iyah, some women, I don't want to name people, but who have like big organizations, and their husbands have another wife as well, by the way, right? So I'm just saying, Yani, that sometimes there's a knock-on effect, right? Of
I know what you're
being
saying.
a very public, very sort of outward-looking woman who's doing a lot of work outside the home, whether it's Dawah or otherwise. So I think it's a decision that everyone has to take for themselves. But I would like to ask you, like, how can the Dawah organizations that currently exist, how can they start having a greater role for sisters?
So before I answer that, look, about what you're saying about this conflict, I don't really think it's a conflict, because the vast majority of sisters and even brothers will never be part of formal organizations anyway. They'll just be giving Dawah in their own capacities. Yeah. That includes obviously sisters. So those who will go through those issues, they are sort of symmetrical to the issues that the brothers go through who are working on in certain organizations, and their family life suffers. But I do think that when you and I've actually seen this. I might as well say it actually, because I've said this, or people know of it. So we have brother Ayman and sister Dahlia in Honduras, right? So they have a beautiful story where sister Dahlia was, basically she converted to Islam when she was in Honduras. She went to go study in Tunisia. She there met Ayman, and they went back to give Dawah in Honduras. They opened up the first Dawah center in Honduras, and that's when we came across them. So they're a power couple, and they literally, like, if you give tasks to one, you're giving tasks to the other. They both work for IRA now, mashallah, right? And they do the work of 11. They don't do the work of two people. They literally 11, right? And so that's the type of example that I would give, where you can actually have this. And I would say
of course,
that you can actually have really successful cases which go against what you're concerned about. But that would really only happen if you have that understanding between the couple. If you have this situation, there are situations where the brother's not even practicing and the sister's involved in a Dawah, in some sort of Dawah effort. So you can, those are the types of things that don't work.
I think we had quite a few of those couples in IRA, really, didn't we?
I don't know anything about
from the beginning. The sorts of couples who are both working for Dawah.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I thought you meant the other type of couple.
No.
No, not that I
So,
did.
for example, I would actually consider my husband and myself to be one
Oh
of those as
yes,
well, because
yes,
my husband was always very involved in dawahs from when we got married, and so was
mashallah.
I. And we were doing local things, you know. We'd been doing it since we were at school. I would meet people who would say to me, "Oh, I came to Islam because of your husband." You know, just
Mashallah.
randomly, I would meet people, and they'd be like, "Oh, at university." And so, I think there are people who have that dawah bug, if you like. And as a couple, if you have a vision for your family that incorporates dawah, then that's beautiful. That's something it's gonna work. And I think that's what's been the case in our family. Definitely.
I mean, I honestly don't know where these comments come from.
Okay.
Allahu Akbar. Like, seriously. At least they've written astaghfirullah in there.
I would really like to know what people think of what we've discussed so far.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. But when you go to the comment section, you find things like this. So
No,
clearly, some people aren't listening unless this
the
is
more
like,
the more sensible comments.
yes. No, it's interesting. There's actually a lot of people who are, you know, they're resonating with what we're saying. I think one of the things which I did want to speak about is when it comes to women converts in particular, the vast majority of converts, as we know, are women, right? We know that's just true. Then we have the additional problem that if you're a male, you convert to Islam, you walk into the mosque, you know some friends. Women, they don't have that confidence to go into a mosque and say, where's your women's classes, where's this, where's that? And a lot of mosques, you can't even pray. Can't even pray as a woman in those mosques, right?
Sadly, yes.
Let alone have anything else. So then you have obviously the issue that majority are female, and then they don't have access, and then you may not have, they may not have that confidence that men have to be assertive and do those things. So we get left with a vacuum. We get left with sisters who aren't getting involved. And remember, this is also very, very important. A huge part of the dawah is not actually going out there and giving dawah. It's actually taking care of the new Muslims. It's actually teaching them how to pray, how to fast, doing these types of things. That's a massive part of the dawah. If you're not taking care of new Muslims, what kind of dawah are you giving? So, there's been many situations, and I know of brothers who've been in situations where they've got all these sisters that they need to teach Islam, and they're literally like messaging me, can you get a woman in your family to take care of this person? I remember a Polish sister who it was Ramadan, like 2013. She was walking around in Lewisham. She bumped into us when we had a stall there, and she hadn't converted to Islam, but she was fasting, right? And then she took Shahada, and she'd been learning about Islam, and she already believed it to be true. And then the first thing we were like, okay, none of us, there's no sister here. Who's going to take care of this woman? And I remember we were just like, okay, do you know this person? Do you know that person? We just tried to find some random women to try and take care of this woman, because there's literally no one available. There's no support network. And even support networks that do actually exist, the vast majority, they won't be able to cater with the demand that we actually have of women converts.
I think that's why recently there have been, new Muslim support groups that have started to pop up, right? Because sisters started to see that there was this need and it wasn't being met.
Yeah.
So, for example, in London, we have Solace, right? I don't think they're just based in London, actually. Solace is to support new revert sisters. There's Turning Point Academy. These are just the ones that I know of, but there's probably many more. In East London Mosque, they have a support group for reverts. Every week they have a circle and they, have different activities and things. There's the Revert to Reality Centre in East London, right? So I think, and all of those projects are run by sisters. So I do think that some sisters did notice this and have started to cater for these things. And then there's probably a lot of sisters doing these things informally, So like you said, I get the phone calls, can you please support this sister? Can you teach her?
Yeah.
Etc. What do you think is the solution? Because then couldn't we argue that the Dawah organizations that are encouraging everybody to do Dawah should also be now thinking about what's in place after the Dawah,
So I'll give you an example of, because alhamdulillah we deal with dozens of organizations every year, new ones across the world. There's an organization in Denmark whose name I can't pronounce or even remember, but this organization was set up by some sisters, and what they did is they had a very interesting model.
Okay.
They would go through social media and find Islamic videos or random stuff where non-Muslim women are commenting. Then they would message them on Facebook and other platforms. And because there's women messaging women, nobody's worried. Then they would give them dawah. When they accept Islam, they would take care of them. And then they would actually target their families and friends and this type of thing. Like they'll extend out that circle. So by the time our guys went to meet them, they had 40 volunteers, right? There's 40 people working in this organization. And as you know, volunteers are gold dust. Like volunteers are very hard to maintain. But they had 40 solid volunteers and they were actually growing. They must be much bigger now. This is back in 2014. And that was their model. Their model was, okay, let's bring in these new Muslim converts. Let's teach them Islam. Let's get the converts to talk to their friends and family. And then they kept extending it that way. I mean, that's such a powerful model. And it's not the sort of thing that brothers can do. I mean, if a brother messages a woman right online and says, I'm going to teach you Islam, like, it's just not going to work. So things like that. I mean, there's some very successful cases like that. And this is what I'm saying, that I don't think it's a case where existing organizations need to make room for or do something to facilitate more women coming in. That is going to make a difference, but not a significant difference. A significant difference is going to be made by these organic organizations popping up, which are almost like designed for women to be giving dawah in those environments. Because a lot of women, let's be very honest, they just don't like being, especially practicing Muslim sisters, they just don't like being around men. They just don't like being around practicing Muslim men. They don't feel that comfortable. And they don't even feel comfortable, interacting with, sometimes even other non-practicing women. They sometimes like being in a very particular environment. So, it's we can sort of look at those things as some examples of successful case studies.
So then I think it's also a case of empowering those sisters then, right?
Yeah.
Because setting up an organization when you don't have experience can be quite hard, but obviously if you grow it from a grassroots level, then it's more organic in that sense. I think slowly but surely it's happening,
Yeah.
I do think it's slowly but surely happening anyway. But I do think the already established organizations could help by at least providing mentorship, maybe providing even funding in some cases, because I know sisters who've got projects, but they wouldn't even know where to start with funding. But there actually might be great charities out there who would be willing to fund their projects. But do you know what I mean? Like if you've never done it before, you don't know what's out there.
Yeah.
So maybe some of the bigger organizations could incubate and mentor sisters to be able to do this, maybe.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would agree with, because there are a lot of hacks. There's a lot of ways to grow an organization, grow a structure, understand what culture you need to set, certain things which those sister organizations can actually learn. But at the same time, it works the other way. I mean, when we came across this organization, and I'm going to have to ask Salahuddin what the name is, Salahuddin Patel, who works for us, because he actually went to go meet them. we were learning from them that this was a really
Yeah,
clever way of
mashallah.
actually giving dawah. And it was almost like you could tell, even if you didn't know the details, that this was an entirely feminine project. Like they knew exactly how to
Mhm.
target those women. They knew exactly what to say. They knew exactly how to grow it. They knew exactly how to structure themselves. Maybe what we could do is just highlight those case studies, because look, yes, we should be careful of showing off our good deeds and doing these types of things. But however, imagine a documentary about this group of sisters, just to motivate other sisters around the world and say, look at what these guys did, right? um there's a brother, Nadeem Ashraf, who, he's working on, grassroots dawah, and he was telling me about, sisters team, I think India or somewhere, in such a difficult place where they were operating. So you always get these successful stories, and it's about highlighting them and showing that it can work, so people are motivated. But most importantly, it's sharing best practice. It's actually sharing, this is how you do it, so it can be replicated, because it can be quite daunting, going out on your own and trying to start these things off.
Yeah. But I do think even the current Muslim organizations, they do have a lot of female volunteers,
Yeah.
So sisters are still the ones who are doing a lot of the legwork, if you like, in a lot of the organizations. So yeah, I think that's a good idea, highlighting projects, because when you're especially us in Britain, I think we're still quite a young community. We take it for granted, but if you think about the South Africans, they've been there for like, what is it, 5, 6 generations, right? South African Muslims. By that time, you're so well established. Your institutions are so well established. Your infrastructure is so well established.
Yeah.
We're just like the first generation that were born here, right? And now our children are the next. So it's going to take time, I think, to learn how to do things. But I think we're seeing already more and more sisters, more and more people who have project management skills and, all of these amazing skills and talents.
Yeah.
The more we inspire people for dawah, I think they will use those talents naturally for that,
Yeah, definitely. And especially considering that a large demographic of the dawah accepting Islam are women. So you kind of have to disproportionately get women involved, because the vast majority are women. In some places where we work internationally, we this is the very problem that we face, that there's so many women, and then their teachers should actually be women. But one of the things that we do, one of the models that we have, is that the people giving dawah are the people who do the new Muslim follow-up. Because if you are giving dawah and you know that you need to do the new Muslim follow-up, you're going to make sure it's a good shahada, and you're also going to make sure that you have a vested interest in taking care
yeah.
of those Muslims, because you're the one who took shahada. And that's one of the
Not
lessons that we
superficial.
learned in Africa in particular, where we were having a lot of success, is actually, hiring a brother and his wife, right? Hiring like somebody, and one of the models that we were looking at is getting somebody, always having a female person there present to make women more comfortable, and for lots of things, safeguarding, and all this type of stuff. So that's really, really important, and it can't be emphasized enough. And we were talking about the role of women in dawah, and you sort of highlighted how there are a lot of women involved in dawah. But at the same time, I do think there are women out there who believe it's simply a man's role, and therefore they don't get involved. I do think there's that perception as well.
I haven't met them.
I
really haven't, because maybe it's the sisters that I know, I don't know.
Yeah.
But so many sisters I meet, they're involved in something or other in their local community, and like I said, look, when we think of a soup kitchen, when you think of the Ramadan tent project, right? For example, you don't. It might not be called a Dawah project. Might not be technically called that. Yeah. But it's probably the most powerful Dawah project. It's an amazing Dawah project. I think it is. You know, the idea of in the month of Ramadan. Okay, I know that it might be controversial, some of the way some of the stuff happens. Okay, but overall, the concept, you know, the idea that this brother, mashallah, a student, he started feeding poor, students basically, right, under a tent, the Arab style, you know, and then he's just started extending that, and now we have cathedrals that are hosting these Ramadan projects, and I mean, it's pretty amazing. And something like that, it might not technically be seen as Dawah because nobody is probably shoving a leaflet in someone's face or even maybe having a proper Dawah conversation, right? Just a second. Just realized. Yep. But can anyone deny that there's a very powerful Dawah element to a project like that? I don't think you can, because, you know, people get together, they meet Muslims. I think so much of the misconceptions in our times are due to people not even meeting Muslims, you know, in a relaxed setting, for example, or not knowing a Muslim, or not having broken bread with a Muslim. And the sorts of projects that I see sisters running, they're not necessarily called Dawah projects. Like I said, the Muslim Sisters of Air in Ireland, they just have a soup kitchen, but just the power of seeing these women in hijab feeding people, you know, I don't think you can quantify that.
I see what you're saying, but for example, that organization in Denmark who were involved with giving Dawah direct, I mean, I think generally what you're describing, I would not say that is Dawah, because
really?
In America, they love this and they call this Dawah, right? They do lots of community work, whether it's men or women, everybody does it. But look, you study at SOAS, right? You get the Krishna guys, giving out food there regularly. I mean, everyone's out there to do something good, but that's not enough. That's not really Dawah. I mean, that's where I would disagree. I would say that that's just laying the foundations for conversations or facilitating things. But just because a woman's out there wearing a hijab and giving food to the homeless, like why would that be Dawah? Like, I just don't understand why that would be
is. It just is.
Well, why?
Because how many I've met so many reverts who they'll say, they saw a Muslim do something that they hadn't seen other people do, or for them personally, to them personally, and that made them curious about Islam. I know that maybe that person didn't necessarily teach them about Islam directly, okay?
Yeah.
But they definitely got them thinking.
Yeah, but I think look, I see what you're saying, and it could be that they converted to Islam out of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's stories where somebody's just doing community work and then someone became Muslim through it. But I think we need to understand there's a problem with Muslims discharging the difficult duty of speaking to people directly about Islam through doing things which they're calling Dawah, is not really Dawah, which is community work. A lot of this happens, right? A lot of people.
I don't know. Look, Brother Sabur, I used to subscribe to that myself, right? Because that was the IERA line, right?
It still is.
Okay, yeah. But I think my view about that has changed.
Come back to the office, we'll reconvert you.
Yeah. Okay. I think my view regarding that has changed, because I think, I don't want to be rude, but I think sometimes da'is can be a bit elitist about this whole thing, because we're like this amazing group, right? We're this amazing category of that. Look, I'm not saying anything about you personally, right? But it's kind of a bit self-serving, isn't it? Like to say, well, we're doing the real work, you know, but actually, really, is that the real work? You know, I just want to say that I think people are very different, and people have very different personalities. They have different things that speak to them, and different talents they want to use. And I don't think we can force everybody to have a very direct dawah conversation with somebody, you know.
I think it's the opposite. I think not opposite, actually. I think there's something else going on. What is easier, doing community work or speaking directly to people about Islam, speaking to them directly and trying to convey why Islam is true? What's more difficult?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So if I was to talk to a general Muslim and tell them, look, you have two choices. You can go out there, there's a soup kitchen, you're going to be feeding people, you don't need to talk to them about Islam, but you know, they're going to see you're Muslim, right? And then the other choice is actually you're going to be here at a stall or whatever, or some exhibition, and you're just going to be talking to people about Islam. What would people prefer to do naturally?
I think it depends on their personality. Because
it can do, but I think most Muslims would say, yeah, I want to do something good. They wouldn't have the confidence to go out there and say, I'm going to talk to them about Islam.
I'm not saying that both can't be done. I'm just saying that I don't think we can discount the impact of positive community work.
Oh no, I'm not discounting.
I think also this is because, like, maybe because one of my shuyukh, one of the things he used to say is that we talk a bit too much, you know. There is that as well. There is that danger as well, that we end up being just all talk. But we're not the people in the community who are helping people out with their problems. You know, people have real problems. We're good at talking to them, but we're not there.
I don't understand why these are put as two mutually exclusive things, right?
Yeah, so they have to be hand in hand.
No, but it's kind of like the way, because I've heard other people say this as well. They're kind of like, no, people need to see Islam, and they need to see you do action. They need to see you do good stuff. You know, don't talk to people about Islam. The Prophet ﷺ built trust with people. We don't have trust with people. We can't talk. The fact is, look, you know, you can't say that one is in place of another. Do community work. In fact, community work, I believe, will facilitate the dawah. It will definitely facilitate the dawah. It will make things easier. Look, going back to the science of influence, right? Likability. People like Islam because they're doing community work. Okay, I'm more likely to learn about Islam. That's fine. But I think a lot of the times, and I'm going to say this categorically, it is an excuse not to talk to people directly about Islam and tell them why Allah exists, why the Quran is true. And what they would rather do is say, I've done my duty of dawah because I was at soup kitchen last week. Let's not conflate the two. Do the soup kitchen, but also understand that it's your duty to convey Islam. And let's not call that dawah. I think that's very problematic. Calling community work dawah, I'm gonna have to disagree with you there. Like that just, for me, doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. I think we become a bit too ideological when we say that. You know, like who are we to tell somebody that their chosen methodology or path to start the dawah process off, right? Maybe is not dawah. I mean,
well, it's like somebody
sometimes having a cold conversation can cause more damage than good.
Who said cold?
Yeah,
we're not saying cold. If like what you said there, I don't disagree with. If somebody is to say, right, soup kitchen is just the beginning, but we are planning on actually taking people on a journey, that's not a problem. In fact, one of the brothers, I was just talking to him the other day, he does exactly that. He has a stall where they're giving out food for the homeless, and then they have next to it an Islamic stall, and you don't have to visit the Islamic stall. You don't have to talk to the other people. All you can simply do is get your food and walk away. And I've actually, outside Zimbabwe House in central London near Charing Cross, we've done that. We've done that exact same thing. Just give out food, talk to people, be a nice person. And by the way, naturally, there's a stall. Naturally, you can talk to people about Islam. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem I have is when people just do the community work and they say, yeah, this is the dawah. And then they fundraise for that. And then they have organizations based upon that. And then they call this calling to Allah when they're not calling to Allah. Sorry, you're just feeding people, which is very good, but you're not actually giving dawah.
Depends. If they give out copies of the Quran, what I'm trying to say is not everybody feels comfortable having a direct conversation.
Right.
And I think it's great that we empower people to be able to do that. And I think that's what IERA did, which was excellent. You know, people who might not have considered having those conversations were now empowered to be able to do so. But what I'm saying is some people, their personalities are not such that they really want to have, you know, they're conflict averse, for example, right?
Mm-hmm.
They prefer to do good actions and, you know, be kind to people, etc., and give them a copy of the Quran at the end. You know, I'm just saying, like, they don't want to have a very direct.
See, I don't mind. Like, look, for me, if somebody is to say, look, this is a dawah project, and all they're doing is they're handing out something that we were planning on doing, by the way, handing out cold water bottles in central London, and there's some sort of Islamic message in there on the label. Like, I would understand, okay, you're calling that dawah, that's fine. But especially in America, this happens where people are just calling things, look, this is dawah, and they're collecting money and they're saying, look, we are involved in dawah, but literally all they're doing is community work. And in fact, I've interacted with, you know, some of these people, and they would criticize what we're doing and saying, no, that's not dawah. In fact, you know, they would challenge the dawah and they would say, no, you're not there to tell people about the differences. You're there to tell people how we're all the same. I literally have heard this from people, right? And we need to sometimes just be more confident than that and say, actually, no, we are going to do community work. We are going to do this and that. But at the same time, if we could just share one verse of the Quran, we could just share one prophetic teaching.
Yes.
That, I mean, that would for me would be enough. I would say, okay, fine, there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, having quotes of, you know, just generally Gandhi or Rumi or whatever, and just handing out stuff, and we all love each other. Like, what is that? That's not dawah.
That's maybe PR. I don't know.
Yeah, that's PR. In fact, that may have a place, right?
Yes. That's what I mean. We shouldn't discount that those efforts have a place. That's all.
Yeah. I remember there was a few years ago, there was a...
and in fact, wait a minute, those efforts actually might be making the work of the da'is easier.
Exactly.
You see,
a few years ago, there was
had an experience.
There was and this happens, right? There was a organization up north in Dewsbury, and what they would do is they would hand out biryanis from a local restaurant. And they wouldn't give it out to poor people. They'd give it out to everybody. I remember one guy, he came and he took 7 containers and he said, I'm going to put them in the freezer. It's hilarious. But next to them was a stall. Like, that for me is ideal. It's like you're not hiding your Islam. You're like, okay, fine, we're giving out food. Why are we giving out food? Because you are brothers and sisters in humanity. You're Bani Adam, right? We don't hate you. You know, we consider you our, you know, we're from the same stock. So, you know, stuff like that. But what really irks me is when people use the label dawah, fundraise, and they actually don't do that. They actually just hand out food. When actually, you know, nobody converts to Hinduism or Hare Krishnaism or whatever it's called because the Hare Krishnas are out there in SOAS every day giving out food. Like, no one does that. How does that facilitate, you know?
Yeah, but it's not. I know what you mean. Like, I guess what I'm saying is that, I think different people have different efforts, and we don't want to, like, belittle their efforts. That's all. And maybe some people, they're not so inclined towards direct forms of da'wah, but they feel that being a confident Muslim, being visibly Muslim and doing good is a form of da'wah, because people can see that you're a Muslim and you're doing good. The way that that is a form of da'wah is that there can be unspoken messages that are being given through that. You know, what kind of a person does kind things? What does it say about their religion? What does it say about the teachings of their prophet? Do you see what I mean? Like, there's a lot of unspoken things. In fact, there's actually a saying, I've forgotten who said it. I think it was one of the church fathers, actually. He said something like, preach, and if you must, use words. Something like that. There's this amazing quote, right?
We'll move on from this, but I still disagree. I still disagree with that.
I'm just saying that there are different ways to people's hearts.
No, definitely.
Some people come to Islam because, like, if you look at the time of the Prophet, some people came to Islam because everyone else was coming to Islam. You know, like that was the catalyst.
Yeah, social proof. Right? Yeah, social proof.
Yeah, some people come to Islam because the elite are coming to Islam, and they see somebody elite, and that makes them think, oh, Islam is the religion of strength and izzah, right? So I think there's different paths to people coming to Islam. And what I don't like is sometimes the way we used to kind of almost, it's kind of easy to say, isn't it? Like that is a special, like in some way. It's a special elitist group, special elitist type of work, when I'm not so sure if there's only one way of doing dawah, and that is having a dawah conversation. We can think about it more, inshallah.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to agree. Look, at the end of the day, you know, even amongst dawah organizations who do believe that you have to, because I'm of the belief that it has to be a conversation. It's not about your manners or those things. Those things always help. Those things are always good. But I think for far too long, the dominant narrative that has stopped Muslims giving dawah, I believe, is that narrative that just be good, right? Be good, and they'll say the shahada if they see you, you know, helping a cat come out of a tree. Like, that's a very like dominant narrative that you will find amongst many Muslim speakers, right? And you'll find that in khutbahs, you'll find that, like, I've heard that all my life, I'll be honest with you, right?
Okay.
And that's why I fight against it, because I see that as one of the reasons why people don't give dawah. I'll give you a sort of, like, non-Muslims prefer it sometimes when you don't do anything like that. When you're just direct with them and you say, look, I'm just here to talk to you about Islam. I know it's difficult, and I know sometimes it's a bit like, you know, okay, you need to do some warm-up beforehand, but sometimes you don't. And sometimes actually doing community work backfires as well. You have to keep that in mind, because they think you're trying to convert them and you're trying to use food, right? Which obviously you're not. You're just trying to facilitate stuff. Like I wanted to give you an example of an organization called Meet a Muslim Neighbor.
Yes.
Meet a Muslim Neighbor. I'm sure you've heard of them. They used to work with us back 10 years ago or something, right? These guys, that's exactly what they would do. They would go to a town center, they would rent out a room, they'd have all this fantastic food, and people would come in and they'd have finger food there and, you know, samosas or whatever, and they'd talk to people about Islam directly. Like that, you know, that's something I guess we could see as you know, the best of both worlds.
Yeah. I mean, in essence, I agree with you, because that's my modus operandi, right? Like, I can't just, if I really love somebody, if I really care about them, I've got to share the message. You know, for me, that's just natural. In fact, I would see it as a sort of betrayal if I've had a relationship with you for ages and I haven't actually conveyed the message to you, you know? Yeah. That is where I naturally sit. I guess what's happened is that over time, maybe being in different leadership roles, I've realized that people come in different personalities, and sometimes different types of work suit different people, you know, and people don't always feel comfortable in certain and we shouldn't necessarily, we should empower them, definitely. But if they naturally feel inclined towards a certain way of being and a slightly indirect way of being, then I think we should value that work as well. That's all.
Yeah, we can do. I am of the overall belief that Muslims have a massive inferiority complex. And those same Muslims that are saying that they want to do something more indirect, or in their own professional lives when they're working for GSK or whatever, they'll give a presentation to the board. They'll do whatever with confidence. When it comes to Islam, that confidence, disappears. But I do want to talk about another aspect of women's role in the dawah, but I am going to ask, it's been 1 hour 40 minutes, are you okay for just to go on a bit longer?
I
Because we
think
did
10,
initially
10 more minutes, is that okay?
yeah,
10
yeah,
more
10 more minutes, yeah, because without Allahu Akbar, it's been 1 hour 40 minutes. MashaAllah. Okay, so one of the things which I think is really important is having role models, right? So when it comes to female role models, who would you highlight in the dawah and say that, okay, this is a good role model that Muslim sisters should look at, and they should be empowered, and they should think, okay, I should be like this person or this organization or whatever?
I think the one I think there are many people, and I'll just share with you people who I admire personally.
Yeah.
So the sister who runs the Revert to Reality Center, Mu'adh, she's not necessarily somebody who a lot of people, brothers, might know of. I'm not sure. She's not on social media.
Yeah.
But I'm sure hundreds and hundreds of women have been impacted by her. She set up this center now where they have a beautiful cafe as well. Sisters can come in, reverts have classes there. People come in who are not Muslims, and they want somewhere to go, where they're interested in Islam, but they want somewhere to go. And there's nowhere to go. Sometimes the masjid is not sufficient, where they don't have the facilities or the projects that will cater to them. So, sisters will come there, and she will take them in a very gentle way, really not pushy. I mean, it's quite amazing, actually, because when I was talking to her, she said that she never, if somebody is not ready to take the shahada, she never pushes them. She doesn't really push them, in the way that maybe a lot of the da'is do. Instead, she just creates the environment that would make it very conducive to them accepting. And in fact, there's almost like a counterintuitive thing that happens. She says when she kind of backs off a bit and says, do it in your own time, it's your call. If they say, I don't feel ready, and she kind of gives them a bit of space, she says they're there the next day wanting to do their shahadas, So I think that sister has really inspired me a lot. Like I said, Brother Sabur, it's not people who are necessarily in front of the camera who people can look up to. And I think people have different personalities. So I've already said that a number of times. And the reason why I've said that is that the Dr. Farhad Hashmi's style of da'wah, or, the kind of organizational and teaching style of da'wah, that's a different type of da'wah that might appeal to some people. But then the more grassroots da'wah that is not very visible might appeal to others. So I don't think there's a one kind of role model, for everyone.
Yeah.
I think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitates us to be what we need to be, right? If we ask him to use us for his sake. And there are different paths and different ways to do that. And each of us have spheres of influence that others don't have.
Yeah.
So I think I value every person out there who's doing their best to try to share the message of Islam in whatever capacity they can with the circles of influence that they have.
Yeah.
And I think more and more Muslims are becoming confident to do that, which is very heartening.
Definitely. And
is there anything in the comments that you feel that we should address?
I mean, this is general sentiment, which I think, some people are raising.
It's true, because the thing is that if you're a married Muslim woman, you've got to take care of what your husband feels as well, right? So if your husband doesn't want you to be on camera, you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Simple, right? So this is why I'm saying that we can't put a one-size-fits-all model for people, Different things are going to appeal to different people, and different things are going to be possible for different people. But I think if you're somebody who wants to share the message of Islam, there's loads of different ways of doing it. When I had just got married and I had a baby and I was at home, I used to do dawah through the radio, That was my thing.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
LBC. I used to phone into LBC.
Yeah, mashallah. Yeah.
And that's like,
I wish those things were recorded. Those are some really good conversations.
But in a way, those were like my practice as well. I used to practice sharing a message, sharing the Islamic take on something.
Yeah.
And it was a great place to kind of practice that. And but do you see, like, there are different, depending on your situation, depending on your ability, depending on your talents, there are different things you can do.
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all model for it. But I think if you're somebody who cares about Islam, who wants to share the message of Islam, start with your local community, start with people who you have an influence on. If you're at work, you've got people at work who you could, set something up for, where you get to share Islam with them. Or maybe if you're at university, there's so many opportunities, right? Discover Islam Week and these things.
Yeah.
Even on a personal level, you can do dawah to your neighbors on a one-to-one level. So I think this, and even parents with schools, nowadays, I think one brother made a very good point. He said we should define dawah, For me, I'm defining it as maybe a bit more broadly, which is bringing people to Allah. For me, that's what dawah is. And that could be making them closer to Islam. It could be giving them the message completely. It could be, for me, it could be anything along that path, Yeah.
I think this is a good question to end upon. This is a sister I've had on the channel before, the Scottish rebate teacher. How are we equipping sisters in many areas, though? And this is where your organization, maybe you could explain what they do and what you guys do.
Yeah, so we've just started, really, but alhamdulillah, last year we managed to, so the organization is muslimwomanhood.org. We're very open to your suggestions, sisters, and your collaboration as well. So please do reach out. You can email me on director@muslimwomanhood.org. So essentially last year, one of the pilot projects we did was we did media training for Muslim women. And this was with a Guardian journalist, Rachel Sharby, her name is. And it was quite amazing, actually. We had activists, we had da'iyas, we had we had an author, we had sisters from different backgrounds. Some of them had been invited by the BBC, invited by media, but they had been avoiding it, because they didn't feel confident. And I just happened to know Rachel, and I'd attended a media training course with her in the past, and I invited her to run a course for us. And mashallah, we had this intensive training, including on camera, learning how to convey your message in a kind of high stakes setting, in a kind of live setting even, not compromising your message and not being thrown off course. Basically, some of the training that I wish we'd had back in the day, when we were defending the niqab or whatever it was, that we were having to do on television with zero training. And yeah, so I wanted to start empowering sisters to be able to do that. That's just one area that we've started. Jazakallah khairan. We started to kind of pilot and start preparing people for, because I do think we've got to think on different levels, so the media training is not going to be for everyone, but there's so many sisters out there I know who are in different lines of work who want to speak to the media, even as activists, like, for example, people who are speaking out against certain political things like Prevent and things like that. A lot of times sisters are in these positions, but they're not really trained. And I think we need the training we should be giving our sisters. Actually, brothers need it as well, to be honest. But we need to start thinking at that kind of level, where we're not just winging it. And we're not just like, we're putting da'is in positions where they're having to talk against, or, on a panel with people who have been media trained. I don't think we can underestimate how a bit of training can actually help, convey your message in a more effective way, and etc. So that's just one example of something that we're doing. There's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of work that could be done. So we are open to your suggestions and collaborations, and of course to consult with you as well, Brother Sabur.
Brilliant. Jazakallah khair for joining this live stream. It was nice speaking to you, and I'm sure a lot of people learn a lot. This is one of our new Muslims from Australia who definitely enjoyed this discussion, and it was brilliant having you. Jazakallah khair, Sister Fatima. So please,
I hope you didn't find my comments too harsh on the brothers, especially.
I don't think you've seen the other live streams on this channel.
Okay.
those were. I mean, I like disagreeing with people, to be honest. And I don't mind having disagreements on here as well. And I do believe that there definitely has to be a distinction between debaters and the art, and these things have to be clarified, because I am a big advocate of Speaker's Corner, actually, for the same reasons that you highlighted about how it can empower Muslims. But I definitely agree with you that that is not the height of dawah. Like, that it's just debating. It's something different, and we should just treat it as something different.
But also about the manners, I think that's an important thing to highlight, because sometimes I think we all need reminders, don't we, to improve our manners. Sometimes we can start falling short of our own standards, get a bit carried away. So I hope that we can remind the brothers, that sometimes you win the argument by staying calm, in that situation. And not every single argument necessarily has to be won with words,
Yeah, I need to learn that myself, actually, before I speak to the rest. It was great having you, mashallah, on the stream. Until next time, Jazakallah khair, everybody who's watching. Sister Fatima, anything you'd like to add before we end?
No, I just want to say Jazakallah khair for the opportunity for the discussion. I'm still developing my thinking in some of these areas, so it's interesting and valuable to just But yeah, I just want to say to everybody, I hope everyone does their part. You know, we each have a part to play. Some of those things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspires us to do and puts those talents in our hands. So I think, you know, use your talent for the sake of Allah. This is what our pious predecessors and people of the past did. Whatever talent they had. I'm writing the book about Aisha radiallahu anha. Aisha radiallahu anha, she realized that the main contribution that she could make, very powerful contribution that nobody else could make, was that she had an insight into the sunnah that nobody else had, right? She had knowledge that other people had not been witness to. And so so she realized at some point that instead of being politically active, which she had kind of done at a certain point, actually her role was to be active in educating the next generation, you know? So I think each of us have to do that kind of self-reflection and ask ourselves, what is the best use of my talents for the sake of Allah? You know, what's the unique contribution that I can make, or how could I use my talents in the best way? And inshallah, act on that.
Absolutely. Great message to end upon. Jazakallah khair, everybody, for watching. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi